Welcome to the Boomer Woman's podcast. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. We've all heard of the subconscious. We have subconscious thoughts. Where in the subconscious do our dreams originate? In uni, we could get into great, deep conversations about this elusive topic. Elusive no more. Denise does a great job of explaining the subconscious, why it might manifest the thoughts it does, and how we can rewire our subconscious stories, and why rewiring those subconscious stories might be the most important personal improvement project we undertake. Listen now. Have you ever heard of procrastination? Perfectionism? I'll leave a pregnant pause here. They are both parts of my past, but I've shed both of them to some extent. My guest today is an inspiring empathic guide and mentor who creates space for women ready for personal growth and change. The core of this work is to guide women to what is possible when they align their external world with their internal desires in work and life. And I appreciate having my notes today, as seeing that sentence in real time is quite impactful. Denise is well qualified, holding mental health and leadership degrees and certifications in MAP and intuitive alignment. She has 25 years of experience in the field. I really like the opener on her website. Have you succeeded in one or more areas of your life, yet have a nagging feeling that something is missing? Do you sense that you want to do something else but are unsure what it is or how to create change? On my own website, I state that my old life is no longer enough. Let's get started. Denise Miceli, welcome to the Boomer Woman's podcast.
Thank you so much, Agnes. It's such a pleasure to be here among my boomer folk.
Oh, I know. It's great. I can't get enough of it. Denise, in
Yes.
reading your profile and your bio, it sounds like you've pivoted, shall I say, your word is transformed to a more intuitive approach to your calling. Is that true? And can you tell us about that transformation?
Sure. It's something that I realized over time as, as the decades go wear on us, we start to, like, as you mentioned, start to question, is this right for me anymore? And I had been committed to a career, and it was a very formal, sort of a bureaucratic structure, and I was making good progress in it, but there was something changing within me that led me to think about, is this really something that is speaking to, my heart and soul anymore? And honestly, I started to feel just not so sure. And even though, and this is the hard part, right? After all of this time we put in education and years and moving up the ladder and all of that stuff, we do a good job at it. But to actually pay attention to how we're feeling about it and having to look at that more deeply and say it's okay if how I feel about it is changing. It doesn't mean that I've chose the wrong thing. I mean, I did this for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever length of time. But if we don't listen to that voice, that's when we start to see bigger changes. And that's for me how it began. Was I started to listen to that inner voice, and it was feeling sad more often, feeling, just not so excited to go in and not so excited to, put in that full day of work. And it wasn't feeding me in the same way anymore. And so that's why I say when we begin to listen to that inner voice, I realized, wow, I've had this inner voice for a long time. I was, aware of it more probably as a child, when I would just get this inspiration to go run out into the woods or dig in the garden, or, that's what I try to work with my clients on, is like, what are the things that bring you joy, that's where you're listening to your inner wisdom, your intuition. And that's what we need to continue to follow. But we get so bound up in these careers and these tracks and all of this stuff that that voice becomes like very quiet. And we have to really clear some space to realize, you know what, that's a powerful part of me and I shouldn't ignore it.
What I'm hearing is that the real you is you weren't just your job or your profession. It was the real you saying, "Hey, you ever going to pay attention to me or what's going on?"
Exactly, and we can put the degrees. I see my degrees are showing on the wall, and we're proud of them. And again, it took a lot. And don't get me wrong, this didn't happen overnight. I had to really kind of go inward and say, it's okay. And was I 100% sure it was okay? Not really. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I tried some variations of it at the end. I was like, oh, I'll go to a different level, a different division, a different, but the bottom line was there was something else calling me. There was some deeper level of myself that was not satisfied with this version of me. And I think it's so key what you said. We often we feel like we are what we do. And that's not the sum of us, right? Even our relationships, especially as boomer women, we're defined by like mother, wife, teacher, whatever the job role is. And then we have all of these externals defining us, and that internal part gets a little bit lost, it gets a little bit foggy, and we don't realize the power that's sitting there just waiting, like, hello, hello, that little voice. And then we go, don't bother me with that stuff. But really that inner voice is like calling us to pay attention, because there is something maybe even better, maybe some new way of using those skills. And that's eventually what I saw. Was initially I was like, well, I'm going to pack those degrees away, and and this was just wrong for me, right? But we do that. That's our inner sort of like critic saying you made a mistake. It doesn't have to be a mistake for you to say, after 2 decades of this, I'm ready to take these skills now and really, it took me a few years after I left that to see, wow, I have so much from what I learned from that experience that I can now use as a coach, that I can use as a guide, and, working with individuals. And now I'm getting excited again about working in small groups of women, because the power of being in this group together with, similar age range, similar feelings of dissatisfaction, we learn just by sitting there, right? If we show up to a group and we don't feel like speaking, we can still have insights. We can still have ahas that wouldn't happen if we were just one-on-one. So I'm excited now to be kind of going back from the large group stuff that I was doing to the individual, to like a smaller intimate group where we can work on, like, what is it that you feel is calling you. And we do, different activities to kind of highlight that. Some of us haven't checked in with even like what's important to us since we were kids, and we look back at it and we have a laugh, because we're literally carrying the values of our parents, grandparents, that are so outdated. And we wonder why we feel like we have to stay in these jobs and stay in these roles. And it's like, wait a minute, I am at the most powerful point of my life being at this age, and I can harness that. But first I have to acknowledge, and like I said, even do it with a laugh, because it's really kind of crazy how, they don't teach us about values in school. So I'll do an activity like that. Let's talk about, I'll give people like a sheet of words and say, just without thinking, pick 10 things that are important to you right now. And like the first thing people do is go to like what their parents taught them. And then they go, and then I tell them, I want you to think about that over the next week. And they come back the next week and they go, I crossed like half of them out. And there's other ones that are important to me now. And that's so important that we realize that we are evolving and changing. And sometimes those roles and expectations are trying to keep us stuck in what we thought we were, and what worked for a long time, but it's no longer appropriate. So
There's so much to unpack there because you and I are so in the same choir. It's great. Because I also talk about, we start out as daughters and, then we become wives and employees and mothers and all
Mothers
of it. And
and
then we go back to being a daughter because we're caregiving our elderly parents. But
correct.
it occurred to me as you were talking about that little voice inside. I'm going to quote off your website in a minute, but is that our long neglected child? Because as children, you were saying you were, I don't know, playing in the forest, or I don't know, I was climbing trees, all sorts of things.
Yep.
I was building tree forts, but I got so far away from that. Now, you say childhood 0 to 7 creates subconscious patterns into adulthood that require deeper healing to create boundaries and a happy life. Now, I want you to elaborate into that, but does that mean that our true soul, for lack of a better word, it comes from that 0 to 7?
There's a lot of neuroscience now that says what we do during that time. Because think about it, we don't have all those societal things integrated yet, right? We don't even have logic yet at 7, right? We don't develop that until later, and so we're just taking life as it comes. We're just like we're trying to be happy. Now we all grew up with different situations, right? Many of my clients have said, they had that be seen and not heard kind of thing, and so we all had different messaging around like how to, being boisterous, being joyful, being excited. Like I wanted to play guitar and sing, and so I often found more comfort going out into nature and being able to be free and things like that, because I felt like there was a lot of constrictions. I had to kind of, be a certain way. And so when we are young like that, we don't have all of those preconceived notions. We haven't absorbed them. We're still learning, like, oh, they like it when I act this way, or when I look cute, or I don't get dirty, or, whatever we all have these things that we learned, like, to be pleasing to do, right? That's the beginning of us learning as women to be pleasers, because we want to please our parents, our grandparents, and all of that. But it is a time when, we often explored things that just made us happy. And when we look back now, I'll say to people, think of something you used to do then. And for me, it's nature. Like now I live somewhere where I can just literally be out in beautiful nature very quickly. And it's life changing, because you're feeling all the natural highs, all of the joys that you can just, if something happens in life, which it's going to happen, you can simply change your state by just walking outside for a few minutes. And so I'll say, was there something when you were a child that was discouraged in you, that you had to escape to do, like the nature? Maybe it was gardening, maybe it was just getting your hands dirty and nobody wanted your hands dirty, right? It's those things that sometimes are calling us back. And sometimes it's things where we saw someone like painting or doing whatever, and we never got to do it, but it stuck with us, like, I want to paint, or whatever it was. And so I do believe that after that age, for that next level, now we're going pre-adolescence to adolescence. Oh boy, we start to really buy in to all the societal things, how we should look as young girls, how we should behave, how we should, and so, and then there's, interactions with, with whether people like me or not just in the home, but now in school and competition and all of that. So we start to take all of that on, and a lot of that, joy stuff gets left behind, because now we're just trying to be liked. We're trying to be seen and loved and appreciated and all of that. And so it is really true that what we develop during that time, like if, for example, many of us have had parents that were very controlling, maybe one, maybe both, maybe a grandparent that was very like, it had to be their way or the highway. And if we had that, that could often make us develop into more of a pleasing personality without even realizing it. Because at that time, anything that we did, we learned what didn't work, right? And we learned, and we hid, any behaviors. We tried to hide them because we wanted to be seen and appreciated. So when we haven't really dealt with any of that, and I tell people, it used to be, people said, oh, was it childhood abuse or that? It doesn't have to be anything like that. It could just be a memory of feeling different. can just be a memory of feeling like, my room has to be neat or else. And I'm not really that neat of a person, but I was compelled to be that way. And so, we start to look back and just think, what's the predominant memory and or the emotion? For example, if someone was always sad in your household, did you go towards that or did you go on the other side of that spectrum? For me, there was sadness, there was a lot of suffering, and I am the most resilient person. So, sometimes the things that we are challenged with as a young child, we learn very quickly, like, how do we adapt to that? And it often will become a strength. So I do believe that all of the times I was told nope, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this, but I'll be quiet while I'm doing it. Or, we find our path, or we succumb to that. And then we sort of are in that trending, emotional state of just long suffering or whatever. And there's plenty of that in my family. They didn't need another convert. So that's kind of how it will impact us there in the subconscious. And we can, talk a little bit more about that. Some people call it parts, like there's internal family systems therapy that calls it our younger parts. So sometimes I'll use that language, like, the part of you that didn't feel seen, that didn't feel heard, or that felt like you had to rescue others. But then some people like to talk about it as what's in our subconscious mind, our memories, our emotional states that we have held on to from that time. And some call it like a saboteur. We all have those inner critics, those inner judges, the pleasers. All of those are things that we can work on, and we can say, you know what, I see you, because like for me, I became a rescuer very young. So I had to have a little chat with that part and say, I want to thank you so much for protecting me during that time, and by taking care of others and all of that. But it's not your job anymore. I love you, and I love to use a metaphor. So I'll say, you can sit in the back seat now. You'll always be a part of me. I love you, but I'm in charge now.
I
Yeah.
came into this conversation thinking that I knew what I was talking about, but now I'm going to be a little confused, and I'm hoping you'll clarify for me. Is the subconscious, and that term is used throughout a lot of what you do. Like, is the subconscious like all those bits that have come together over the years, or is it that original child who knew no boundaries because they were still just figuring it all out? Like, as I say, I'm obviously
Sure.
confused. You go in now.
Yeah, so the subconscious, the way I like to, I think it will make a lot of sense. Is it's kind of like having an iCloud of your entire life. So it's got every emotion, every memory, some things that you just have a feeling. You don't necessarily have a specific memory, but sometimes people have a memory. So it's all of that from 0 to 7, and it's everything else. So, we could have a traumatic experience or, a bad breakup or something in our 20s. And that has stayed as a part of us that is not really fully healed yet. So maybe we approach relationships in a way that still holds on to something, some hurt that happened, or is it a trust factor? So it really is, kind of just putting all of that stuff together in the background. And when I remember doing this when I was in my dating years, of sitting down with girlfriends and saying, what are your non-negotiables? What are the things you want in a partner? And what are the things that are like, that would be nice, but it's not a deal breaker, and we'd sit there and do that. But the thing is that if you're not aware of what's going on in the deeper levels of yourself, that subconscious part of yourself, you could say you want all these great things, right? Financial independence, and, somebody who likes to talk about the relationship, right? Because some people don't. Some people just want it to be perfect without doing any work. So, you put all that down, but then you meet someone and they're attractive and you're attracted to each other, and all of that just goes out the window, because the thing is that the conscious and the subconscious minds, even though they're in the same brain, they don't have a mechanism to talk to each other. So that's where the subconscious is very emotional, it's very feeling based, it's very memory based. Whereas the conscious part of the mind is like, I'm going to have these goals, or this is the kind of relationship I want, or all of these things, but they're not talking to each other, at least not in a way that we've learned so far. And it makes sense. People who create goals for themselves and then come back and say, I didn't do anything that I said I was going to do. I don't, what's wrong with me? The first thing they do is the inner critic wakes up and says, you should have done all of that. You had a great session. And they would come back and say, I just don't know what's going on. And I will say, there's some other saboteur at work here. There's some part of you that's not buying into it. Maybe you have a restless part or a pleaser part, and you don't want to say, for example, working with people who want to change their health, you don't want to say no to your friends who want to go to a bar after work, right? And you're just like, I don't want to drink, I don't want to eat bar food, but you do it anyway because you really want to be with them. And this is something a lot of people experience as life changes, right? Because we can't keep up the same habits that we used to have. And so what's wrong with just saying, hey, can we do something other than this? Can we go for a walk? Maybe not every time going to a bar or a happy hour, it's not that enjoyable for me. And without apologizing for it, and that's where that pleaser is still, we know it's highly active because that subconscious part of us, oh, I'm just going to go. I really, we do have fun and all of that. But then what do you end up doing? You're eating the bar food. You maybe, get pressured into having a drink. And then you feel like crap. And what did you do? You walked over your own boundaries because you wanted to be liked and you wanted to not, we are fearing confrontation because we were told not to speak up about things, right? So that's kind of how, and I know it's much deeper than all of that, but I try to put it in terms of like a metaphor of the subconscious and the conscious. And there's a reason why we get stuck in things like perfectionism and people pleasing and even imposter syndrome, because we start to really doubt. We're like, I wrote all these goals, but like I'm not getting anywhere. And that's where that intuitive part, that deeper listening is what's missing, to really hear what the subconscious is really, trying to do, maybe in a way that we don't want it to, right? We don't want to be the pleaser. We don't want to be having zero boundaries, which honestly, a lot of the work I do ends up leading to boundaries with women, that they feel that having a boundary means having to be confronting people. And actually, it isn't. It's just that we've taught people that we don't have any. So when we say anything, we can't expect them to just be like, oh, that's fine, because we're not saying who we really are. And that's where our intuition and our authentic selves get buried in all of the pleasing.
One of the best sentences that I ever heard, or best phrases I ever heard, is no is a complete sentence.
Exactly, exactly. And and there's always this urge to explain why. And it's even, as you mentioned, we're taking care of parents. And, sometimes, I can hear my sisters saying things like they just won't just say no. No, mom, I can't make that big trip right now because blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, don't do all of that. You're an adult. She's an adult. We've taught her that we have to have an excuse. We can reteach her. I mean, she may never learn it because, she's at an advanced age, whatever. But the point is that if we don't take ownership for that, then is it really, it's not other people. A lot of times when people say, I have no boundaries or people pleaser, it's so negative. But really, it's about taking responsibility for who you are and what you want in the moment. And also just like what is off limits. And we are the ones that are allowing that to happen. So part of that uncovering the intuition is trusting yourself that it's okay to say no and that not everyone will like it. And guess what? That's okay too.
Now, I was going to ask you what subconscious healing is, but I think the more we talk, the more I have to say, like, where do you begin?
Well, you really just, when we do, there is like a little bit of a training that is about 10 minutes, honestly, and it explains how our brain works on a level of like how it associates certain emotions with certain types of situations, right? It's called association, dissociation. Certain things like, okay, I'll bring up the T word, triggering. Everybody has trigger warnings now. Why is that? Because things that happen are triggering a memory that we've associated with something really deeply painful or whatever, right? So that's where association. Now, sometimes if people are shown things like that, repeatedly in a movie, for example, they can dissociate, they can pass out, they can leave the theater, they can be so their conscious mind is trying to dissociate them from that experience because it's overwhelming. So it has a lot to do with what goes on behind the scenes between the parts of our brain, but it's not in an effort for to get people to consciously understand it because it's complex, right? So we give like the overview and we give examples. Like one of the examples is when you learn how to ride a bike, right? Nobody like reteaches you how to do that. If you don't ride a bike for 5 years, you get on the bike and you're riding it, right? So there's a part of our brain that stores all of the important information and it's there for us, but it can be paired with other things depending on our experience. So this is really what it's based on. So it really comes down to talking to the person about what is the primary emotion that you feel. Maybe you felt like you want to leave this job for a long time, but you are so filled with fear. Fear is a pretty deep emotion, right? There's something being blocked in you. So we work on just trying to soften that by just talking to the parts. And we just let the parts know that it's okay to feel what you're feeling. And so there's a language to it. It's based on that internal family systems therapy, but it's also based on the idea that we can talk to the brain. And you've heard of neuro linguistic programming, right? It's a tongue twister, but it's involved. So the therapist that created this, Make Anything Possible, he really studied both of those structures and then created a language to speak to parts of us, to speak to to speak to our brain in ways that using our intuition as coaches, we can help the person to access that and to try to reduce the intensity of it. We never seek to or tell people that we are going to get rid of a emotion or a memory. There's a lot of different therapies out there that will tell you that they can get rid of them. They're a part of you, but they don't have to be kind of front and center in your decision making and all of that. So that's what we do is we just start at the beginning where people show up. What is it that is, we ask them to rate it like a lot of different, therapies do. We say, pick something that is not a 10 for the first session, but pick something that has some intensity to it. And we work on bringing that down. And over time, what tends to happen is we start to clear space in the person's emotional state to where they start to begin to see the other things that have been sitting there waiting under that fear. And we use like an emotional ladder, like so many different programs use, where we're like, okay, if you're down here at fear or anger, we can start to move you upward, right? And we want to get you to feeling lighter so you can see and begin to listen to that inner voice to see what else could be possible for you. Because when we're in fear or anger or any of those intense emotions, it's pretty hard to move forward.
Right.
So
Now, I saw a phrase on your website, rewire our subconscious stories. Is that what you've just been talking about?
exactly. And so what they have found now, and there's so much data on this, it's pretty exciting. I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to research, but they've actually shown that when we talk to the brain in this way, that there are changes that happen. They've done these scans where they can show, do they fully understand all of it? I'm sure it's all developing, but they've shown that people who are doing this work, the brain before and after, and there's changes. So we know that, listen, what we think in patterns becomes, right? We think of something over and over, it becomes our belief. So if we think we can't do something like leave a job, leave a toxic relationship, then we can't. So the only way through that is to confront it and to try to soften it and to get that emotion from blocking us, that belief. Those self limiting beliefs often come up in the first few weeks. So we deal with the most present, intense emotional feelings or memories that seem to be on stuck on repeat. That usually leads to deeper beliefs about the self. And we work to reframe those, right? So when we do a session, as we come towards the ending of a session, we try to go into a positive now. What can we say to promote the other side of this? Like, I am the a powerful creator of my life, instead of I can't do that, right? So how many women especially have you heard with the ongoing sentence stem, I can't, right? I used to get just a kick out of, once I started learning this, how many times we start a sentence that way. And we don't realize that what we say and what we give energy to is what we become. So we want to end that session with something of an I am statement, or I can, something more positive to begin thinking. We're not going to turn it around in one session, especially these patterns we've had our whole lives, but we can begin to see, okay, I am a creator. So now I can slow myself down when I go to say something, or even when I have that critic come up. And I tell people this, whether you think of it as subconscious or just your saboteurs, name it, like call it out and say, I'm not going to let you judge me like that, because we do have a very strong sense of judgment if we had controlling kind of parents or anyone in the family that was always present and always judging how you looked, how you spoke, how much noise you made, whatever it was. So name it and say, yo, judge, I am not putting up with that kind of thinking anymore. That's not okay to judge yourself so harshly. Because when you think about, we hear about compassion and people having compassion for differences and all of that. We have so little compassion for ourselves. And that is a result of those judges, those critics that we grew up with, that kind of stayed in the background. But boy, they have a loud, persistent voice. And if we just can start to acknowledge that and see that when that negative thought comes up, where is that coming from? And start to slow it down. And that's where we try to teach some tools of, like, whether it be meditation or walking in nature. There's not one way anymore to quiet your mind, but in the morning or at right before bed, our minds are in a state where they're more receptive. So how can you offload your day? How can you offload the constant thinking that's going on, so that when you're sleeping, you're not still processing all of that? So you can begin to have more of a sense of inner peace. And that's, of course, going to make your intuition sound a little bit more reasonable and actually be a little bit more heard, because you're not, with all of this. Because if you're not on the sad, depressive side as a woman, you tend to be on the anxious side, which was my my all-time fave of that overthinking brain, right? We just cannot stop the reels from spinning. And what I realized after a long time, where there were certain people in my life that we just talked about the same negative stuff over and over. Well, what happened during that time? We stayed in those same negative situations because we were feeding each other's saboteurs, really. And I finally just said, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I'm going to, end this relationship, whatever it was, but let's not talk about it. Let's not give it life and say why, just that long suffering story becomes our story. And that's where I talk about, what are your storylines? Start to look more closely at those repeated thought patterns, because there's something there that you need to kind of debunk it, because it's really not your truth.
We're talking about women, but are there gender differences with this?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, for me, I just resonate so much because I feel I've been through so much. Like, I mean, I was part of, like, the women's movement. We were fighting for all the rights that we've now lost. So, it just really resonates with my soul. But I do believe that men and different genders, like people are going through massive change, and their, the role differences, the interactions with each other. I mean, it's just all over the map. So absolutely, I think, men are certainly struggling with what, being the, the strong silent type, right? That was from our era, that was valued, so men that are creative, or men that are more communicative, or more, have what quote unquote feminine qualities, they don't have it easy either. And so, and I think that men just feel very disconnected because they're not feeling like they know how to even approach women anymore, especially, if they don't want those traditional roles, if they don't want to be a husband or a father. I think that leaves a lot of them very vulnerable to movements that are, quite frankly, pretty scary, because it's like, well, all of these people don't want to connect with me. And so then possibly getting involved with groups that are kind of seeking vulnerable people. So I think there is definitely application for this work, and many, many practitioners of this neuro linguistic programming and parts therapy and all of that work with different, their own little niches. And I know some of them are business coaches that are helping people in business to see that, some of their saboteurs are coming up in their business, and they're preventing them from being a good leader. They're overly controlling their team, and they're not giving their team enough freedom to create, and everything has to be their way. And so there's so many applications for it, even just for me to narrow it to like midlife. And I do work with some midlife women on just adjusting to menopause, and adjusting, how to adjust to it in ways that is that are comfortable without feeling like you have to do a medical solution. A lot of it is honestly just really paying more attention to how you feel. Back to the feelings again, is that if we could listen and say, you know what, sitting in front of a screen for 8 hours, like, it's no longer feasible for me because it just isn't good for my health, which you would think, companies would catch on at some point. People need to have those breaks, and so as we get older, we actually can make the choice to do something that allows us that type of a freedom and doesn't keep us kind of locked down. And I think there's a lot of women in their like 60s and up trying to stick with it for those last years or whatever, and they're burning themselves at both ends because they're not paying attention to what their body's saying. And of course, we know what happens with that, when we don't listen to those things. I was looking around me because I was coming to the 20-year mark, and seeing a lot of women who were just so unhealthy, going into the hospital and just coming out with like, they had a massive disease, and because they were just ignoring all of their own personal needs in service to the job, their family, all of the responsibilities. And it's almost like I could see that for myself. And I was like, I don't want to go that way, and so that really was the driving force behind it. Was I wanted something different for myself that would allow me to be able to be more creative, to be able to help people on a deeper level.
Ooh, it's a big one. Okay, I
Hmm.
opened my intro with procrastination and perfectionism. How do you
Yes.
deal with them? Are they linked or?
Yeah, I mean, they're all part of those saboteurs in us,
Mhm.
right? For some of us, it's the procrastinating. And for others, it's like procrastination and perfectionism. Now that you mentioned it, they can be highly linked, because think about this. So if I spend 2 years working on my website before it's good enough, I am procrastinating at just trying it, right? I want it to be absolutely perfect. Well, guess what? Every single day, some algorithm changes, and you need to make a change anyway. So, as entrepreneurs, for example, it could be the death of your business because you're waiting too long. And even as a coach, so many coaches now, you cannot go anywhere near any technology without being pitched 100 different coaching training offers. I think there was just an article about how many, coaches are vulnerable to feeling like they're not enough yet. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so true. We want to help others so much, but we don't feel like we're quite ready. Like I've heard so many say, and I'm like, how many programs are you in? They're in like 4 or 5 programs. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how do you even breathe? So I've made a pact with myself. I'm cleaning out my email because we don't realize that we're doing that out of a need because we don't feel good enough yet. And so part of my uncovering of all of this and doing this now with the subconscious certification I got during the pandemic is realizing those things inside of me, those gems that I have, I don't need any more training to bring them out. They're going to come out when someone's sitting in front of me, and they do. And so it's, I think a big struggle with people that are breaking out from like a more structured job or career and trying to go into something of their own is like, they had a system behind them, right? It can be very limiting, but at the same time, it kind of measures how much training you need and all of that for you. So it can be quite difficult if we have those saboteurs that are strong. Now, there is one other training that I am doing, but I am not doing anymore. And it is about these saboteurs because here's the thing. Subconscious it's an amazing tool, but some people when they hear that they are so lost because what do we associate subconscious with? A lot of people think of hypnosis, right? With hypnosis, people tend to think the subconscious is a weak part of our brain because, hey, if you can just sit there and somebody can do this and you're under their spell, they are taking that to mean that the brain is weak. So there's a lot of misconceptions about the subconscious mind, but actually it's the part of the brain that's so easily changeable is why it's so susceptible to hypnosis. That's those neural pathways. So when we have neural pathways that we've been perfectionists because we had perfectionist mother or whatever for so many decades, it's going to take us a while and we've got to build new pathways that say, it's okay. I am good enough the way that I am. And I am not doing anything more to hone my coaching skills. But so I really was looking for something that would help me to present this in a way that wasn't so sort of out there for some people. And what I came across is positive intelligence. Now, positive intelligence is based on good, solid research, but it is framing it in terms of saboteurs. But we're talking about the same thing. So you take an assessment and it tells you what is your strongest saboteur? And it's very helpful because as starting to do work with clients, they come in with this assessment and it says, okay, I got a 10 in the people pleasing, or I got a 10 in the perfectionism. Now we can work on where did that come from and how can we begin to make those new neural pathways that say perfection is not the goal of anything in life. If we don't learn that failure is okay, like, that maybe the colors I chose for my website were a little too bright and people were like blinded when they opened the website. It's a simple fix, right? And so it's about being okay that it's a progression and there's no perfection and all of that. So positive intelligence gives us tools that show us that you can use breath, you can use walking, you can use tactile, you can use looking at something visually, you can use any of your senses to make a new neural pathway. That you can create a new pathway that says, I don't have to react with this saboteur energy anymore. I can build my sage wisdom and I can learn that, you know what? I can appreciate and I can accept someone that has that energy, but I don't have to own it. And I can state a boundary and I don't have to argue or defend it. I can just simply have it. And so it is really a great tool because it gives you on the go strategies for dealing with when these things come up. How can you choose a different pathway? And the more that you do it, just like, there are studies about meditation. People who are in their 50s and up who meditate every day for 10 minutes have as much brain matter as people in their 20s. So I've been on that track for many a year. And you know what? It works for me. I can quiet my mind for 10 minutes. I can put on my headphones and listen to like a sound bath or listen to a beautiful track of music and go there. So whatever works for people, that's great. But today's folks need something quick. And so being able to, even while you're driving, just focusing on the truck in front of you and just being present. It's all about being present. When we're not present, where are we? We're stuck in that saboteur, subconscious programming gone wild, right? We'll end up at home and we're like, I just had a whole entire dialogue about how this job sucks. And instead of thinking positively, I focused on that old storyline that I don't want to live anymore. Yeah. So,
The way I dealt with, well, I still do deal with the perfectionism, is I have a phrase that perfect is a moving target. And, like you've talked about
I like
algorithms,
it.
you talked about the website, whatever, like what's perfect today may not be perfect tomorrow. So just get on with it. And, if you need to revisit it again tomorrow, whatever, but just get on with it. Don't get
Yes,
stuck
and
there.
when something isn't working, I mean, how many times we're looking at a problem on our computer and we're just like, oh, I just want to throw it out the window, right? So that is a clear sign you need to get up and go do something else. And there's a bunch of gurus now saying that if you, out of every hour, if you were to take 10 minutes to just get up, go away,
Yeah.
move,
Yeah.
whether it's like walk around the block or whatever it is, you've changed your state. And now, not only are you going to come back fresh, but you may have figured something out while you're out there, or just decided when I go back, I'm going to work on something more fun for me. Decide that for yourself and create the pathways that are acknowledging how you feel. And I think that's really the key, is it's about present moment awareness, even when we don't like how we feel. Because maybe it's my back is hurting, I've been sitting too long. Well, that's important, right? If we sit past that, or like now on my wish list is the standing desk, because I don't like sitting. I really don't. But I do force myself to get up and go down the stairs and do things physically where I didn't have that freedom in my job before. So when we take these big risks, they often will come with quite nice rewards that we can find later in life. And of course they come with their own challenges as well. But like you said, it's about acknowledging that whether it's perfectionism, whether it's people pleasing, we can see a different perspective, but we've got to slow down enough and debunk those stories that we've been telling ourselves to really see that inner voice that is waiting to be listened to.
Okay, I mentioned at the beginning, I've gone through your profile and I've done a whole bunch of stuff on your website. So
Yes,
I've
thank
put
you
this
for that.
together, and you tell me if I'm right or not. You deal with the subconscious, then you change your perspective. That's how you
Hmm.
create new habits, and then you are
Yes.
more free.
Yes.
Whoosh, patting.
I know it sounds very simple, yet it is quite profound, because when we're trying to build a new habit, and I know this from my teacher days, 21 days, right? When you do something for 21 days, and honestly, most people don't even take that long. When I used to work with students who had emotional problems, even back then, I was learning to give them a very specific goal for that week and a strategy when they felt triggered, and then expecting them to do it and observing them doing it and rewarding them for doing it. And guess what? Now they had a little sign that said, I'm going to do this breath when I feel this way. And it changed the pathway. And, if a third grader can do it, then certainly, right? But I mean, these are kids who, like, they had a lot of urges to just like somebody look at them and just punch them. I'll never forget one of my first years teaching, kids did not know even how to ask for something. They would like hit another kid, and I just wanted a pencil. Well, why are you hitting someone? Like, it's just learning how to interact is it's something you just build a neural pathway for. So I feel like there's so much out there now about neuroscience that, like I said, I become somewhat of a geek with it. But it really is true that we just have to build new pathways, and those old ones, they'll always be there, but they can, they're not going to be as well worn anymore if we don't keep going down them. And most of us know what our struggle is, whether it's the self doubt, the critical voice. And we, even if we're not in touch with ourselves, we can look at how we behave with the people that are closest to us, because we usually let our hair down with those people, right? And they'll tell us, oh yeah, you're such a judge. And I never thought that, I thought because I was such a rebel as a kid and always wanting to learn and all of these things that were kind of foreign to my caregivers, that it was kind of like, well, do you really, you really want to go to college? You really want to do all of these things? Like, why? And I was just like, why not? Like, I don't want to stay in what is expected of me. And, when you allow yourself to think outside of the box, so to speak, then you're allowing space for that in those pathways. And that's where I talk about creating space a lot. Is, we have so much information coming at us this in this day and age that, I think back to when we had like the three news channels, right? We had just the three channels. And now, and even like computers, they were these rooms, one giant computer. So we have literally seen massive change in our lives. And so we have to realize that a lot of things that we may be struggling with we're kind of stuck back in a time that is really, it's no longer. And so we can allow ourselves to be open to this new frontier, and to the power that we have within us to create the change that we want to see.
Yeah. Now, I know you are tight for time today. So tell us where we find you on the World Wide Web, and you have a course.
Yes. So I have a course. I'm just running it twice a year, and it is a very exclusive small group of women. It is a 12-week program. We meet every single week, and we go through these. We go through the emotions, the beliefs, all of the things that come up, with lots of activities and interaction. And the sessions are recorded, so they have, participants have access to go back, and we do it all, and we connect the body, the mind, how we're feeling in the body and the mind. So it's a fantastic journey. And you can find me at Rock Your Blocks. There's links there to, I have a Facebook group where I live stream every week so people can begin to experience some of this. And I do talks on there, but I also do like guided meditations on getting in touch with your inner self. And so check me out at Rock Your Blocks. And yeah, this has been really great. I love your show.
Oh, that's great. I always ask a personal question at the end, and we probably don't have
Sure.
time for you to answer it. You started out as a chef.
Yes, I did. I did. I come from an Italian Greek family, so
Oh,
everything was around food, and so I didn't have any formal training, but I ended up working in restaurants during college, and the schools I was at were near the Culinary Institute. So by osmosis, I got trained by people with culinary training, and I absolutely loved it. I still have a passion for cooking. I mean, now I cook a lot healthier, but back then I cooked all the
all the
all the
good stuff.
the evil, all the good stuff, all the evil good stuff. But yeah, so that's how I started out in my 20s.
Oh, that's
And
great. Okay, your website link is in the show notes. All the links are on your page at our website. Listeners,
thank
if
you.
you have thoughts on today's show, please talk to us. We all
Yes.
started somewhere in order to get to here. Is here enough, or do you know there's more still? Leave comments where you're listening, or if you're listening at boomwithabang.com, scroll to the bottom of the page and talk to us there. Is there a question I didn't ask Denise? Ask it in the comments. I'll get you an answer. Leave stars and reviews where you can. I am determined to bring more mid-age women into the fold, and that'll help.
Yes.
Share this episode. I mentioned at the beginning, I say on my website, my old life is no longer enough. I also say I no longer see any point in remaining silent. My views, my beliefs matter. No fix is immediate, change is a process. Perhaps most importantly, there are many reasons why I will no longer be the one to change the world, but I will be a role model for the generation of women who will change the world. You may or may not realize you're a role model, but you never know who's watching. Be the woman you want them to aspire to be. When you share this episode, your friends will also be able to be their best and be the role models they need to be. We also have a new feature. The Boomer Woman's podcast is growing. You can buy me a coffee. That's a pretty cheap option. Well, cheap given my taste in coffee. You can also subscribe to Buy Me a Coffee each month, and that does gain you some, shall we say, age specific perks. The link is in the show notes and above Denise's head on her page at our website. Denise Miceli, thank you for being my guest today and really opening our eyes to the influence of our subconscious and how we can rewire it and create the life we want.
Thank you, Agnes. What a pleasure.
Thank you. Have a great rest of week.
You too.